The scent of freshly baked bread and the constant, rhythmic churn of industrial mixers were the soundtracks to my life. For 20 years, those sounds symbolized stability, hard work, and the sweet satisfaction of a dream built from scratch. I was 47 years old, and the bakery empire, Aunt Lena's Artisan Goods, was my creation. It wasn't just a business. It was a promise made to my mother, Lena, a guarantee that her recipes and her spirit would endure. Starting with a single modest shop in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I, Daniel Thorne, had grown the operation into a regional powerhouse, a wholesale distribution network supplying high-end goods to supermarkets and gourmet restaurants across 3 states. My success was built on 2 pillars: the unparalleled quality of my mother's sourdough starter and my absolute, unwavering trust in my only sibling, my younger brother, Marcus. Marcus was the charismatic face of the operation, while I was the quiet, meticulous artisan, obsessed with yeast cultures and supply chain efficiency. Marcus was the smooth-talking Chief Operations Officer, COO, handling all client relations, negotiating expansion deals, and, critically, overseeing all the financial paperwork and contracts. He possessed a charm that disarmed everyone, a quality that complemented my reserved nature perfectly. He was my brother, my partner, the only family I had left, and the man I trusted with my entire professional and personal future. My trust, I would soon discover, was the most valuable asset he would repeatedly mortgage for his own selfish gain. The first betrayal, the one I convinced myself was a momentary lapse, happened 10 years ago. Marcus, without my knowledge, had taken out a massive, unauthorized loan, $500,000, using the bakery's inventory as collateral, intending to gamble on a volatile real estate development that collapsed almost immediately. The bank almost seized our main distribution center. I discovered the fraud when a panicked loan officer called me directly. The confrontation was brutal. Marcus, tears streaming down his face, offered a dozen frantic excuses. Bad advice, poor judgment, desperation. I forgave him. Family comes first, Marcus. But never again. Never touch the business without my signature, I told him, covering the loss with my personal savings and taking out a crippling second mortgage on my house. I rationalized it as saving my brother from ruin. The second betrayal, 6 years later, was a clear escalation of his moral pathology. He started diverting funds through a complex system of fake invoicing, skimming nearly $200,000 over 2 years to finance an absurdly expensive, custom-restored vintage car he was obsessed with. This time, I didn't find the financial ruin. I found the car, parked proudly in his new, lavish driveway, a monument to his deceit. The lies were more polished, the excuses more elaborate. He claimed it was a tax write-off and a temporary accounting measure. This time, forgiveness was harder, tasting like ash. I forced him to sell the car, made him sign a legally binding document ceding all financial control to an external accountant, but I kept him on as COO. "You're my brother, Marcus. I won't exile you, but you've lost my trust," I warned, giving him the third final chance, a chance only a fool or a brother could grant. The third betrayal, just 2 years ago, was a sickening echo of the first, a failed attempt to negotiate a secret, leveraged buyout of a competitor using the bakery's primary land deed as silent collateral. His greed, his ambition, always outpaced his intelligence. I caught the attempt just as the contracts were being drafted, stopping the financial collapse by hours. I didn't shout. I didn't fire him. I simply stared at him across my office desk, the finality of the situation freezing the rage in my throat. "You are pathologically unable to respect boundaries, Marcus. You have no moral compass." He left the office that day, not fired, but stripped of all remaining power, relegated to meaningless public relations work, a ghost in the empire he helped build, but whose foundation he continually tried to undermine. I forgave him the third time, not for his sake, but for my mother's memory, the fierce, unyielding belief that family must remain whole. But the fourth time, the ultimate, final betrayal, was the one I never saw coming. It was a slow, malicious act of sabotage, driven by the bitterness of his demotion. He couldn't steal the money anymore, so he stole the foundation of the business itself. He manipulated the environmental controls in the primary aging room, deliberately exposing my mother's irreplaceable 50-year-old sourdough starter, the biological, spiritual, and commercial heart of Aunt Lena's artisan goods, to a fatal, high-temperature shock. He destroyed the starter, killing the unique yeast culture that gave our products their singular flavor and our business its unshakable market edge. The damage wasn't just financial, it was existential. The forensic reports confirmed the deliberate override, and Marcus, when confronted, didn't deny it. He simply smiled, a cold, malicious expression of victorious malice. "Now, brother," he hissed, standing in the wreckage of the ruined lab. "We're finally on a level playing field. Let's see how smart you are without Mother's magic." He thought I was broken forever, finally defeated by the destruction of my emotional and commercial core. He thought I would dissolve into grief and bankruptcy. He was about to learn that I may have forgiven him 3 times, but the 4th time, I would teach him a lesson built on absolute professional annihilation. A lesson he would never, ever forget. The destruction of the sourdough starter wasn't just a business loss, it was a spiritual amputation. It severed the direct, living link to my mother and the decades of tradition that defined our brand. The market reacted instantly. Without the unique flavor of the original starter, our products were merely expensive, high-quality bread, easily replicable by competitors. Our contracts began to dry up. Major supermarket chains, citing a loss of unique value proposition, started looking elsewhere. I watched 2 decades of work erode in a matter of weeks, precisely as Marcus had intended. The financial projections were terrifyingly clear. Bankruptcy was inevitable within 6 months. Marcus, having finally achieved the ultimate act of sabotage, vanished, using the small remnants of his severance and his charm to move to Atlanta, where he started consulting for rival food distributors, positioning himself as a high-level logistics expert who had left a stagnant family business. He was thriving on my ruin, believing the 4th betrayal had finally broken me for good. The first month was a paralyzing haze of despair. I felt the profound shame of professional failure and the crushing emotional weight of having let my mother's legacy die. But the despair didn't last. The cold, triumphant smile Marcus wore in the ruined lab, the arrogance of his belief that he had won, acted like a psychological defibrillator. The forgiving brother died that day, replaced by the focused, relentless entrepreneur. My new singular purpose was not just survival, but professional superiority and absolute retribution. I wouldn't seek criminal charges for the destruction of the starter. It was too complex to prove with the finality needed to guarantee a conviction. My revenge would be different. It would be a total, public, professional takeover of his new life. I knew Marcus's new path. He was selling his expertise, my company's hard-won market knowledge, to our direct competitors. He was relying on the fact that I was financially collapsing, unable to compete. My strategy was to use my final, crucial assets, my deep knowledge of the market and the last reserves of my financial capital, to dominate his new environment and force him into financial ruin, making him irrelevant to the very rivals he was trying to impress. My first call was to my old financial mentor, Eleanor Vance, a brilliant, ruthless financial analyst who had always warned me about Marcus. I laid out the whole painful saga, the 3 forgiven betrayals, the final sabotage, the financial ruin, and Marcus's new life in Atlanta. "Eleanor, I need a new business, not a bakery. I need a high-tech food logistics consulting firm built on the data and efficiency I mastered over 20 years. I need to become the very thing Marcus pretends to be, only unassailably better. I need to compete directly with his new employers and render him obsolete." Eleanor listened, not with pity, but with a keen professional interest. "Daniel, you have 20 years of proprietary data on supply chain optimization, shelf life integrity, and regional consumer patterns. That data is worth more than your starter. It's an algorithm for market dominance. We don't fight him. We make him irrelevant by being the undisputed authority in his new field." The process began immediately. I sold the last functioning piece of my physical assets, the distribution trucks, and channeled every cent into creating a small, highly specialized firm called AgriDynamics Consulting. I poured the forensic analytical skills I once used for optimizing baking times into developing a proprietary predictive demand and freshness algorithm, PDFA. This algorithm used real-time weather, traffic, and local event data to advise large distributors on optimal inventory, guaranteeing unprecedented levels of freshness and minimal waste. It was the distillation of my life's work, stripped of the emotional fragility of the bakery and recast as pure, cold, unassailable data science. My goal was simple: to secure contracts with the major competitors Marcus was trying to advise, forcing him into the cold, crushing realization that he could never escape my excellence. I know this might just be a voice in your ear, but if you've ever felt the absolute crushing weight of a family betrayal, or fought to reclaim your professional worth after being undermined, then you belong right here. We are a community built on the bedrock of resilience, where survival is not an accident, but an art of turning pain into power. Every time you hit that subscribe button, you are casting a vote for justice and the enduring strength of integrity. And please, tell me in the comments below, what was the final betrayal that forced you to change your path completely? Your stories are the fuel that keeps this channel dedicated to the silent, victorious battles of transformation. Thank you for being here. The establishment of Agridynamics Consulting was not a gradual transition. It was a desperate, all-in gamble funded by the ashes of my former life. I traded the comforting humidity of the bakery for the sterile, air-conditioned isolation of a small, leased office in a Dallas tech park, a strategic relocation to position myself at the center of the regional food distribution logistics market, far from Marcus's immediate network in Atlanta. My entire team consisted of myself and Michael, a young, brilliant data scientist Eleanor had found, who was captivated by the real-world application of my decades of supply chain data. We spent a year in isolation, turning my proprietary tacit knowledge into the predictive demand and freshness algorithm, PDFA, a sophisticated tool that could cut food waste for major distributors by an unheard of 18%. Our target was Global Foods Logistics, GFL, the largest food distributor in the southeastern United States, and, critically, the new primary client of Marcus, who was now operating as Thorne & Associates logistics strategists. Marcus had leveraged his past experience and his smooth charm to secure a low-level, high-visibility consulting contract with GFL, positioning himself for a lucrative long-term deal. GFL was his shield, his stage, and his new financial foundation. To destroy Marcus, I had to take GFL. I knew Marcus's weakness. He was a fraud who relied on charisma and superficial presentations. He would sell GFL on vague concepts of efficiency and networking, but he lacked the fundamental, analytical expertise to deliver quantifiable results. My strategy was the exact opposite: cold, unassailable data. We approached GFL not with a pitch, but with a fully completed data-backed assessment of their current waste margin. We presented them with a 2-week pilot study, run entirely on our own servers, demonstrating the PDFA's ability to predict and prevent food spoilage in a key product line. The meeting with GFL's Chief Supply Chain Officer, Mr. Alex Chen, was the most critical moment of my new career. Chen was skeptical, having been recently burned by several high-tech consulting failures. "Mr. Thorne," Chen stated, looking over our dense analytical reports, "your competitor, Thorne & Associates, Marcus Thorne, is promising us a 5% optimization through process restructuring. You're guaranteeing 18% through an algorithm. You're asking me to bet our entire fresh produce division on a black box." I met his gaze, my voice steady, devoid of the emotional passion of the baker, now possessing the authority of pure data. "Mr. Chen, Marcus Thorne is a middleman who sells vague promises. I built the largest independent bakery empire in 3 states. I know the shelf life of every product from the moment the truck stops. I know the optimal thermal gradient and the precise consumer absorption rate in every zip code. My algorithm is not a black box. It is 20 years of proprietary market reality distilled into code. The 5% Marcus promises is theory. The 18% I guarantee is data. Furthermore," I added, delivering the precise, targeted strike, "Marcus is the reason my former company is collapsing. He lacks the moral and professional integrity to manage data of this complexity. You are not betting on a black box, sir. You are betting on data-backed competence over proven catastrophic ego." The use of the data, combined with the subtle professional warning about Marcus's past, worked. Chen, intrigued and sensing the deep professional rivalry, agreed to a full 90-day pilot program for the PDFA. The results of the pilot were a landslide victory. The PDFA hit an unprecedented 19.5% reduction in waste, saving GFL millions in its first quarter alone. Marcus's shallow, concept-driven consulting was instantly exposed as obsolete. The data had spoken, and the professional superiority was absolute. The success of the GFL pilot program was the spark that ignited my new life and sealed Marcus's fate. GFL immediately signed AgriDynamics Consulting to a 3-year, multi-million-dollar exclusive contract, establishing my company as the undisputed leader in food logistics data science. The victory was immense, but it was just the beginning. I used the GFL contract as leverage to secure major deals with 2 other regional distributors, systematically cornering the very market segment Marcus was trying to infiltrate. The name Thorne & Associates was quickly becoming synonymous with obsolete and amateur in the high-stakes world of supply chain management, while AgriDynamics Consulting was the new, data-driven authority. Marcus, operating from Atlanta, was completely unaware of the digital sophistication of my counterattack. He assumed I was an irrelevant baker fighting bankruptcy. When GFL suddenly terminated his contract after just 6 months, he attributed it to corporate restructuring, never realizing that the restructuring was directed entirely by the superior performance of my PDFA algorithm. He was being defeated by my excellence, a force he could not comprehend or compete with. However, Marcus was too arrogant to simply disappear. He began a desperate campaign to sabotage my new company. He started spreading malicious, targeted lies, not about my past, but about my present. He contacted my new clients, including GFL, claiming that my PDFA algorithm was stolen intellectual property from the bakery, and that I was facing a massive impending lawsuit from my own defunct corporation. He was attempting to weaponize the very ruins he had created, trying to inject toxicity into my new, clean environment. The moment GFL's legal team called, citing Marcus's claims, I knew this was the 4th, final confrontation I needed to win completely. My lawyer, Eleanor, was ruthless. She immediately filed a definitive civil suit against Marcus Thorne and Thorne & Associates for slander, tortious interference, and unfair competition. The claim was for $20 million, a figure designed not for recovery, but for absolute professional ruin. I filed the suit not in Dallas or Atlanta, but in Baton Rouge, forcing Marcus to return to the city he had so arrogantly abandoned and face the financial and personal weight of his past. The confrontation at the pre-trial mediation in Baton Rouge was the first time I had seen my brother in over a year. He walked into the sterile conference room, his charm visibly diminished, his suit too expensive for his current reality. He tried to offer a handshake, his eyes full of a practiced, pathetic contrition. I refused to touch him. I simply looked at him, my expression cold, unreadable, and completely professional. "Daniel, please," he began, his voice dropping into the familiar, manipulative whisper. "This is insane. We're family. We can't sue each other. Let's just agree to stay out of each other's markets. I'll stop the consulting. You stop the lawsuit." I let him finish his plea, a speech I had heard 3 times before, but this time, the words held no power. "You stole our mother's legacy and destroyed my life's work, Marcus," I replied, my voice steady, carrying the full, cold weight of my 20-year history. "You thought I was broken and finished. You were wrong. I came back stronger, and now I own the market you tried to enter. The $20 million is the price for the 4th betrayal. You are a systematic destroyer, and I am the one who always cleans up your mess. This time, I'm cleaning you out completely." His face, seeing the unyielding determination, finally fractured. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the profound, crushing realization that his path of easy deception had finally hit an absolute, unmovable wall. The legal battle that followed was brief, brutal, and utterly decisive. Marcus, stripped of any genuine financial backing and faced with the massive legal firepower of GFL's defense team, who joined my suit to recover their own legal costs associated with his slanderous claims, quickly realized he had no defense. He had no intellectual property to claim, as all the original bakery data was in my name, and the PDFA was entirely new code. His only assets were his small consulting firm and the expensive properties he had illegally purchased with the skimmed funds from the previous betrayals. The entire lawsuit was designed to seize those final, tangible remnants of his dishonesty. The most crucial moment came during his deposition. My lawyer, Eleanor, systematically exposed his pattern of professional and financial pathology, the 3 forgiven loans and thefts, the final sabotage of the bakery, and the subsequent campaign of slander against my new business. Eleanor cornered him on the final, unforgivable act, the destruction of the starter. Mr. Thorne, did you or did you not deliberately manipulate the environmental controls on the aging room, knowing that this would kill the unique yeast culture that was the sole competitive advantage of Aunt Lena's artisan goods? He tried to deflect, muttering about accidental override, but Eleanor relentlessly pressed the forensic evidence. Finally, under oath and utterly defeated, he whispered, "Yes, I did it. I wanted him to hurt." That was it. The raw, undeniable admission of malice that sealed his professional and personal ruin. The case never reached a jury. Marcus, faced with the crushing weight of the $20 million slander suit and the high probability of criminal charges related to the previous financial frauds, finally capitulated. He agreed to a full, court-mandated settlement. Absolute surrender of all personal and business assets to pay the initial settlement, and a permanent, legally binding injunction barring him from ever entering the food logistics market again. The money, while substantial, was irrelevant. The true victory was the total professional annihilation of Marcus Thorne. I had used my superior business acumen and his own documented malice to dismantle his entire life, leaving him with nothing but the clothes on his back and the cold, hard knowledge of his profound moral failure. I stood on the courthouse steps in Baton Rouge, looking up at the sky, feeling a quiet, overwhelming sense of finality. The forgiving brother was dead. The relentless entrepreneur had won. I had not only survived his betrayal, but I had used the very ruins he created to launch a professional empire based on unassailable data and integrity. I had forgiven him 3 times, but the 4th time, I had made sure he would never forget me. Wow. You've stayed with me through the absolute darkness of a final, unforgivable betrayal, and witnessed the quiet, complete professional demolition of a toxic force. If you've ever had to confront a destructive pattern, especially from someone you loved, and finally drew that unshakable line, then you know the deep cost of this victory. We are a community built on the bedrock of turning pain into calculated, dignified success. If you haven't already, please, take a moment to gently tap that subscribe button and affirm the power of integrity. And now, my deepest, most heartfelt invitation. We all have a limit, that final line of betrayal we cannot cross. Tell me about the moment you drew that line and how it changed your life. Your honesty and courage fuel this channel. Also, please suggest any deeply emotional, human-focused themes you want to see explored next. Thank you for being a genuine, authentic part of this fight. The legal resolution marked the end of the war, but the beginning of the most satisfying work: reconstruction and purposeful expansion. The immediate financial gains from the settlement, the seizure and liquidation of Marcus's unlawfully acquired assets, were channeled directly back into AgriDynamics Consulting. My company expanded rapidly, opening new, strategically located offices in Chicago and Los Angeles, cementing our position as a national authority in data-driven supply chain optimization. The market recognition was immense. My story, the quiet entrepreneur who survived a spectacular sabotage to build an even more formidable empire, became a powerful, silent marketing tool. Clients sought out AgriDynamics not just for the PDFA's performance, but for the unquestionable integrity of its founder. I used the full notarized deposition from Marcus, the one where he admitted the malice, to finally, completely close the chapter on Aunt Lena's artisan goods. I did not try to rebuild the bakery. The soul of that business, my mother's irreplaceable starter, was gone, and I would not dishonor her legacy by selling a product that was merely a substitute. Instead, I sold the remaining physical assets and the brand name to a large ethical food cooperative under the strict condition that they would establish a culinary scholarship fund in my mother's name, dedicated to supporting young bakers who demonstrated both talent and unshakable ethics. The legacy was transformed from a fragile physical business into a permanent, moral endowment. Marcus, stripped of his entire professional and personal infrastructure, vanished. The court injunction barred him from the only industry he knew, and the public nature of the professional scandal made him toxic to any legitimate business. He was forced to retreat to the fringes, an exile in the world he once dominated. I heard reports, years later, that he was working odd jobs, cash work, far from the polished boardrooms and expensive suits of his former life. He had become precisely what his moral compass dictated, an invisible, transient figure, living on the margins. He had traded his birthright for a few years of dishonest extravagance, and the price was his permanent relevance. My focus, however, was forward. I was no longer defined by the betrayal, but by the unassailable quality of my work. I channeled the precise cold energy I had used for revenge into the relentless pursuit of professional excellence. Agridynamics consulting wasn't just profitable, it was a force for good in the industry, helping to cut waste and increase efficiency, transforming the logistics landscape with integrity and data. I had turned my greatest pain into my greatest, most impactful achievement. The years that followed were dedicated to expanding my new legacy. The predictive demand and freshness algorithm, PDFA, became the industry standard, and agridynamics consulting grew into a benchmark for ethical, data-driven excellence. I found a profound satisfaction in this work, a purpose that was stronger and more self-defined than the one I had lost. I had successfully replaced the emotional fragility of the family business with the unassailable resilience of pure data science. My independence was absolute. I used my position not for profit, but for systemic reform. I became a vocal advocate for ethical standards in supply chain management, using my own story as a quiet, powerful testament to the dangers of corporate fraud and compromised data. I presented at national conferences, not as a baker, but as a data scientist and ethics advocate, teaching companies the importance of internal transparency and ethical leadership. My success was a massive public contradiction to the shame Marcus had tried to inflict upon me. The final piece of personal healing came when I purchased a small, quiet property outside of Nashville, Tennessee, a deliberate choice to build a home far from the toxic memories of Baton Rouge and the chaotic energy of the early investigation. The new home was not a fortress, but a sanctuary, a place where the rhythmic sounds of nature replaced the anxious hum of industrial machinery. I had reclaimed my life, built a formidable empire, and found true, quiet peace on the foundation of my own hard-won integrity. Marcus's shadow was permanently confined to the past. He made one final, desperate, and utterly pathetic attempt to re-enter my life years after the trial. A letter, postmarked from a small, transient postal service in Memphis, arrived at my corporate headquarters. The letter was short, handwritten, and stripped of all the old charm. "Daniel, I saw your interview on Forbes. You won. You took everything. I just need money. Please. I'm ruined. You made sure I could never work again." I read the letter and felt nothing but profound, cold detachment. The man who destroyed my life's work was reduced to begging from the ruins he had created. I recognized the truth in his words. I had made sure he could never work again, not with malice, but with superior competence and unyielding enforcement of the law. He had engineered his own downfall, and I was merely the one who presented the final bill. I did not reply. I simply forwarded the letter to my legal team, ensuring that the permanent injunction was still being observed. The chapter was closed. The final phase of my vindication was the total public obliteration of the narrative Marcus had used to cover his retreat. While my professional life was thriving, the ghost of Aunt Lena's artisan goods, the one he claimed was stagnant and obsolete, still lingered. I partnered with the ethical food cooperative that owned the former brand name and used agridynamics data science to help them launch a massive, highly successful national expansion. The profits from the expansion were channeled directly into the Aunt Lena's Culinary Ethics Fund, a foundation that grew into a powerful national voice for moral integrity in the food industry. The creation of the Ethics Fund was the final, definitive statement to the world. It showed that my victory was not about personal greed, but about re-establishing the moral foundation that Marcus had destroyed. The press, which had been tracking my story, highlighted the fund's commitment to integrity, juxtaposing the success of the new venture with the criminal ruin of my former partner. The narrative was cemented. I was the hero of integrity. Marcus was the villain of deceit. My work became my sanctuary. I had successfully transformed a legacy of baked goods into a legacy of ethical data governance. I found a quiet joy in the solitude, a peace that was never possible in the chaotic, high-stakes environment of the family business. I often looked at the data streams on my screen, watching the PDFA algorithm optimize global supply chains, and saw in its perfect objective logic the embodiment of the justice I had fought so hard to secure. The data never lied, never cheated, and never sought self-aggrandizement. It was the absolute opposite of Marcus. The ultimate irony of Marcus's fate was that he was destroyed by the very thing he ridiculed, my quiet, meticulous expertise. He saw my dedication to the tedious technical details of optimization and baking as a sign of weakness and stagnation. I used that very dedication, distilled into the PDFA, to create a professional tool that was so overwhelmingly superior that it eradicated his market niche and exposed his superficiality. He was defeated by the quiet, unrelenting excellence he so arrogantly dismissed. The years rolled by, and the final shadow of Marcus's betrayal receded completely. I had achieved everything I set out to do: financial freedom, professional excellence, and absolute moral vindication. My life was defined by my own making, not by his attempts to destroy it. I often reflected on the 3 times I had forgiven him, the 3 chances I had given him to choose integrity over greed. I realized those acts of forgiveness were not failures of judgment. They were necessary moral prerequisites for the final, absolute act of retribution. I had to exhaust every avenue of familial mercy before the final justified act of professional annihilation could take place. The 4th time was not an act of rage, but an act of professional necessity and self-preservation. I made a point of never mentioning Marcus by name in public. His name was irrelevant. My story was about the power of integrity and the possibility of rebuilding a life on a foundation of unassailable truth. The silence surrounding his fate was the final, most complete form of his punishment. He craved attention and power. I granted him only permanent, universal obscurity. I learned a profound truth from the entire ordeal. You can only be broken by betrayal if you allow your identity to be defined by the actions of the betrayer. My identity was in the excellence of my work, and that was the one thing Marcus could not permanently destroy. He could kill the starter, but he could not kill the mind that built the business. He thought he had broken me forever, but he merely cleared the way for a more formidable, more resilient structure to take root. My life today is proof that the greatest professional successes can be born from the deepest personal betrayals. I stand here, not as Daniel Thorne, the victimized baker, but as the founder and CEO of AgriDynamics Consulting, a national leader in ethical data governance, and the founder of a major culinary ethics fund. My empire is built not on the fragile foundation of family loyalty, but on the unassailable rock of my own integrity and data-driven excellence. Marcus Thorne betrayed me in front of everyone, smiling, with the arrogant confidence that his charm and my patience would save him. He was wrong. I forgave him once, twice, and 3 times, granting him 3 chances to redeem his moral integrity. But the 4th time, when he attacked the very source of my mother's legacy, I made sure he'd never forget me by using my own professional mastery to erase his ability to function in the world. I took his business, his assets, and his professional future, leaving him only with the cold, hard knowledge of his permanent failure. He thought I was broken forever. He was simply blind to the quiet, analytical strength that built the bakery in the first place. I had the patience of a true artisan and the strategy of a professional who never tolerates systemic failure. I came back stronger, more focused, and more formidable, and I engineered his total comprehensive fall. The ultimate victory is not the money or the title, but the unshakable peace that comes from knowing you survived complete destruction and rebuilt a life based entirely on truth. I made sure he would never forget me by ensuring he could never again escape the consequences of his own choices.